I'm David Moore. I'm a range and pasture specialist and CCA for MFA Incorporated. I kind of specialize in forage management for MFA.
For MFA Incorporated, I'm Tom Stever on Brownfield Ag News, talking with David Moore about establishing alfalfa stands. To begin, you suggest starting with a soil test. So what's the purpose of that?
Well, the number one reason that I see for failure of establishing alfalfa is failure to plan well ahead of time. Alfalfa is just not one of those crops that we can wake up today and decide to plant. Pulling a good soil test will make sure that we have ample time to get the pH correct, get the phosphorus and potassium where they need to be, because a significant portion of the soil in our trade territory is going to be deficient in at least one of those categories, and we'd sure like for it to be right before we begin to plant what is an expensive crop to plant.
And also it's important to check out what the herbicide history is of that particular field. Why is that?
Well, it's very important that we look at rotational restrictions on any herbicides that have been used in the last couple, 2 to 3 years, to make sure that we've not set ourselves inadvertently up for a train wreck. Some of them have rotational restrictions that measure in years rather than months, and we need to make sure that alfalfa's got a fair start when we put the seed in the ground.
What's some of the history to avoid in herbicides?
Well, there's a number of herbicides that are used in both corn and beans that just have plenty of carryover. I don't, off the top of my head, have any particular ones in mind, but it wouldn't take me long to come up with that information.
Yeah, in other words, it's out there so it can be checked out rather easily.
That's correct. In MFA's agronomy guide, there is a section towards the front of the book that has rotational restrictions for maybe not all, but virtually all chemistries that are commercially available.
Tell me about preparing the seed bed. How do you do some soil preparation here?
Well, both no-till and conventional till work for establishing alfalfa. My preference is conventional tillage, and probably the number one key is if you conventionally till, we need to have a firm seed bed. It needs to be rolled to the point that you don't leave a whole lot of a footprint when you walk across it. If we leave it unrolled, what ends up happening is that seed will end up too deep. So one of the keys to success is rolling ahead of putting the seed in the ground. I do like to roll after, but if I'm only going to roll one time, it will be before the seed touches the soil.
The actual planting, is that just with an end-gate seeder? Is it drilled? How do you get it in there?
Well, there's a number of ways of doing it. A drill works extremely well. Know the history on your drill and how deep it tends to plant. Set it very shallow. A quarter of an inch is about where I like to see alfalfa. And I really like to see, 10-15% of those seeds on top of the ground, just to let me know that I'm not inadvertently putting that seed too deep in the ground.
What are we shooting for as far as a stand of alfalfa? How many plants should be out there?
I'd like to see 50 to 60 plants per square foot in the seedling year. That is my goal. After the first year and alfalfa is established, we begin to count stems, but initially it's 50 to 60 plants per square foot, and really I think one of the keys to alfalfa is the only competition needs to be another alfalfa plant. Keeping it weed-free is terribly important.
So tell me more about the weed management. How should you go about that?
Weed control, if you're using Roundup Ready alfalfa, we don't have any pre-emerge herbicides that we can put down ahead of alfalfa, but we do have several things that we can do. Roundup Ready alfalfa, probably 45 to 60 days after planting, or when alfalfa reaches the second trifoliate, I like to go ahead and, even if I'm not seeing very many weeds, I like to give it a shot of a glyphosate product with AMS at a quart per acre. If I'm looking at conventional alfalfa, once it reaches the second trifoliate, then I'll use Prowl H2O.
It's important to keep the weeds out of it. Insect management, how important is that?
Insect management can be very important. Typically, probably the number one insect that I don't know how it finds it every year, but alfalfa weevil will find a newly planted stand fairly quickly. So that becomes a little bit of an issue. and we need to address that. Make sure that you check the insecticide section of the forage portion of the agronomy guide and the insecticide section of it, so that we can manage with insecticides that are approved for use on alfalfa.
Now, alfalfa is a legume, so some of the nitrogen fixing is done as a natural process of the plant, but fertility management, there's a lot more to it than that.
Yes, there is. Alfalfa does most of its own nitrogen. It begins setting nodules at about 6 weeks, and thereafter it can provide most, if not all, of its nitrogen. But, phosphorus is just terribly, terribly important for developing a good, healthy root system. Potassium is terribly important for that plant from the standpoint of managing moisture. Without an adequate potash or potassium level, plants tend to lose moisture, what they have available to them. And we do tend to be fairly deficient in potassium in southern Missouri, at least. Given the choice of conventional alfalfa versus Roundup Ready alfalfa, I will always choose Roundup Ready alfalfa unless a customer is wanting to plant grass with his alfalfa, simply because I believe that it's the cheapest alfalfa that a customer can raise. Choose a good variety, and if we'll manage fertility correctly and we manage weed control correctly, stands last a long time. And typically in conventional alfalfa, we lose the stand more to weed control than we do to anything else.
That's an interesting part of this, is how long one can expect the stand to last. How long is that?
Well, I think historically, at least in southern Missouri, stands will run between 4 years and 6 years, and they're lost. Again, very seldom do I think disease really plays a big factor in that. I think it's fertility, and I think it's weed control. I'm looking at some Roundup Ready alfalfa stands that are approaching 11 years old that are nearly perfect in appearance. There are no weeds. They're healthy. They look good. They yield good. So I think if we will manage fertility correctly, and in particular, making sure that we get enough potassium in the soil to meet the growth characteristics of our newer alfalfas. We yield quite a bit more alfalfa today than we used to, and I think we're shorting at times the potassium that we return to the ground. So either frequent soil testing and adhering to what it says, or call one of your local agronomy specialists and they'll help you work through how much potassium it needs. But a 6-ton crop of alfalfa will remove 360 pounds of potassium from the soil, and we can't replace that all at once, or sometimes even twice. Sometimes it takes 3 applications to make sure that we get that right. While we're on the subject of fertility, in establishing alfalfa, it's imperative that we not use any boron. Although boron is necessary for an alfalfa crop that is established, it can become quickly very toxic to seedling alfalfa, so we do avoid it in the seedling year.
Another subject that I'd like to touch on is that how many cuttings can one expect to get, and what's the determinant factor on that?
Well, a lot depends upon the variety that you choose as to how many cuttings you can get. If you're choosing a vernal or a Cody type of alfalfa, 3 cuttings is probably what you're going to get. When you're using good WL alfalfa that we sell at MFA, I would say 4 to 6 cuttings per year would be the norm, weather dependent. We have some alfalfas that basically will work on a 21-day cutting schedule, and I can expect 5 to 6 cuttings per year out of those, and they're my highest yielders. But you've got to be prepared to cut every 21 days. Most of our varieties fall in a 28 to 30-day cut, and those I'm looking at 4 to 5 cuts per year. We have a new alfalfa that's just now become available on a very limited basis and will become more so soon. It's called Harv Extra. It's a low lignin alfalfa that offers us 2 opportunities. One, for our dairy operations or our cash hay guys that are paid on forage analysis, they can go ahead and take that alfalfa cutting at every 28 days and reap the benefit of an improved forage analysis. It will offer more pounds of milk per acre. It'll certainly offer our cash hay guys an opportunity to make more money if they're selling based on forage analysis. For others that are looking at decreasing the cuttings per year, they'll cut that alfalfa every 35 to 40 days and have a very similar forage analysis to somebody that's cutting a a non-low lignin alfalfa every 28 days. Now, that's kind of a rare opportunity to maybe knock one cutting per year off and have the same amount of yield.
We've been talking with David Moore. For MFA Incorporated, I'm Tom Stever on Brownfield Ag News.